Look, it's seduction when I really look at it, it's really about emotional appeal. Am I able to create an emotional attraction? And can I build trust? If you can't tell a good story, both on a date or in a sales call or in a meeting or with a customer, it's probably the last date. It's probably the last sales call with that person, right? It's the last time you're going to do business with that person. A sales is frankly a job of rejection, not a job of yeses, right? It's a hard position. So I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is they hire people for jobs, not careers. I always think that's a big miss.
Welcome to the 10x Growth Strategies podcast. I'm your host, Saradha Sriram, business technology strategist. Our guest today is John Boccuzzi, author of the book, The Art of Seducing Your Customer. John is a partner at ISG and president of ISG Research, where he leads a global team of professionals studying what drives success in technology and services. John sits at a unique intersection working with providers, advisors, and enterprise clients, giving him an unparalleled insight into what actually works when it comes to winning customers. If anyone understands the art of business seduction, it's someone who analyzes hundreds of successful client engagements every day. John, welcome to the show.
Saradha, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. This is exciting.
Awesome. Let's start with this, John. What inspired you to frame customer relationships through the lens of seduction rather than the traditional sales or marketing terminology?
Okay, good question. And it's not the first time I've been asked. So 7 years ago, I did a TED Talk. I was seduced by exceptional customer service. And I was getting prepared for, applying to TED to get accepted. There was 100 applicants. They were going to pick 13. And my wife, Cynthia, said, listen, you've got to really get something that is spicy as far as the title goes for this. It can't just be like, better customer experience. So we played around, and I said, well, honestly, I was probably seduced by this woman in this frame store where I bought my glasses from. And she says, why don't you call it the artist? I was seduced by exceptional customer service and experience. And so from that, when I went to go write the book, I said, Cynthia, what are your thoughts? She goes, what do you think my thoughts are? And so I utilized seduction in the title.
That's a very interesting approach. Can you share a pivotal moment in your career that led you to develop this philosophy?
Yeah, look, I've always been interested as a consumer and a customer myself. How am I being treated? Whether it's a retailer or an airline or, a hotel or other types of services. But really the final moving point was early in my career, I was looking for a pair of frames. And this is, again, what my TED Talk was about, but looking for a pair of frames. And I just happened to walk into a store where the owner approached, and she helped me pick out a very provocative set of frames here, quite, very loud. And I felt uncomfortable that I would be wearing these really loud frames, but she convinced me to do it. And long story short, you can listen to the TED Talk, but long story short, it really led to me realizing, like, wow, when somebody is that confident and can tell stories that strongly, they can have a meaningful impact and frankly seduce me as a customer. And I've done business with her now for over 26 years, 27. She just retired and sold her store in New York City. But I bought my frames from her for 27 years, and I don't even work in New York anymore. I haven't worked in New York in over 22 years. But I would take a day off and go into the city. So I would say that pivotal moment was 27, 28 years ago when I met Ruth, who owned that store, 1010 Optics.
That is a very cute story, and you've been such a loyal customer. You discuss seduction in the business context.
Yeah, the TED Talk. Yeah, the TED Talk, if you listen to it, it's got over 700,000 views. It's the number one TED Talk out there on customer experience, and I have Ruth to thank for it.
Coming back to the book, you discuss seduction in a business context. How do you define this term, and what distinguishes it from manipulation?
Yeah, listen, this is a good question, and it's look, it's seduction in my when I really look at it, it's really about emotional appeal. Am I able to create an emotional attraction? And can I build trust? Can I drive value? And my role is, can I come from an initial interest into really motivating them to make that purchase, that buy? So when I think of seduction, I think of all the positive things: connection, curiosity, perceived benefits, and understanding how connection can happen. And it's really that dance of seduction, whether it's, people think of it as a romance, but I think of it inside of this idea of business context of really being able to seduce that customer to get them to really appreciate, to trust you, and to value the services that you're offering.
The way you framed it was so
Does that make
different
sense?
from. It does, absolutely, the way you broke it down, but also you clearly differentiated it, how it's different from it's similar to a courtship, but different. So what are the key parallels that you have discovered between a regular courtship and a customer relationship?
Okay. So now we're going to get into dating advice. So look when you think about courtship or dating and customer relationships, listen, you're capturing the attention, right? You're a storyteller. You've got to have a strong value proposition. That the same goes when you're dating or when you're working with a customer, right? You've got to build a conversation. If you can't tell a good story, both on a date or in a sales call or in a meeting or with a customer, it's probably the last date. It's probably the last sales call with that person, right? It's the last time you're going to do business with that person. And I'll share a little anecdote that will bring it to life with regards to the romantic side. So I'm happily married now 29 years, but 31 years ago, it was very flattering. A woman approached me at a coffee bar and asked me on a date. That was very flattering for me. And so I said, yeah, absolutely. She was attractive, seemed like a very nice person. So I picked her up and I took her out for dinner, and we're having dinner. And at this point in my life, it's 31 years ago, I am going through a career change. I'm like just trying to figure out early in my career, what am I going to honestly do? And so I said, well, I'm going to blurb that out. And I just told her, yeah, I'm not really sure. I'm in between and I'm going to kind of take some time off. Date was over. She was a very successful lawyer, and she was looking for a partner that was on the same path that she was. Now, look, 31 years later, I'm the president of a research firm, and life is good. Again, I'm happily married. But I think I would have approached that situation differently, no different than with a customer. It's not about being dishonest. It's about understanding, what is that person interested in? Are you listening to your customer? Just like, are you listening to that person on the other side of the table during a date? What are they interested in? And then how can you relate to what's going on in your life with what's going on in their life? And that's the same with a business situation. So anyway, I think that capturing and building that rapport is very similar with regards to a relationship. I don't know, does that story make any sense to you?
It does. You seem to have made a great success out of it, so it does make a lot of sense. In your book, you also talk about a few essential steps or stages. Can you walk us through going past, your success with your wife, how you entice a customer?
Yeah. Look, at the stages in the book are really ideas for a business to pay attention to. They're not stages necessarily of an approach methodically going through. Step up and pay attention is really, do you understand the surroundings that you're in, right? Empowering your employees, that's a crucial one. Far too often I see businesses where their employees are not empowered to make decisions, and that leads to poor client customer experiences. Designing experiences not just for acquisition, but for retention. And there's so many examples of where they offer you something amazing to join, but then once you're a member or part of something, they really leave you behind, and they're focused on that next new customer rather than the retention of that current customer that you made the investment initially. I always think that's a big miss. The next chapter, uncovering friction. Be a friction hunter in today's world. Where is there friction in your business, okay? And there's always going to be friction. The key is how do you minimize it? So I think friction hunting is an incredible chapter businesses could and should be paying attention to. And then connect the dots between what you intended and what the expectation was. Far too often there's a disconnect between what you were trying to do and what you actually deliver. And then the last piece is really, the last chapter is all about this idea of, you can't be ignorant to the fact that there's always going to be competition out there. And it may not be the competitor you thought about today there in the future. So you've got to keep your eye on the competition. So that's really the outline of the book and the chapters. And I wouldn't say it's like a linear line. I think these are all key principles on how to set yourself up as a business for delivering exceptional customer experience.
You packaged it really well. Can you provide a real world example where applying these principles transformed a customer relationship?
Sure. Look, there's several examples in the book, and each chapter's got personal stories and things I've experienced. Look, a couple of good examples would be, think about if you live in New York City or you've ever been in New York City, and you took a yellow cab ride 15, 20 years ago. It was a terrible experience. The air conditioning was too cold. The heat was too hot. The driver was rude. There was a spring coming through the seat. It was not. If it was raining, you couldn't get a cab. It was a terrible experience. And Uber came along, but nobody could compete with them, right? It was a medallion to have a yellow cab in New York was selling, I think, at its peak at $1.8 million. And then Uber came along and said, they looked at the whole problem different. They said, listen, transportation, people are going from one place to another, and other people want to get from one place to another. What if we matched up those people and allowed them to ride with each other and created better customer experiences? And overnight, they took over the concept of and the value of what a yellow cab was doing in New York City. And now look, there's still yellow cabs, and there probably always will be. And they've gained back some of the market share that they lost dramatically. But a medallion today maybe is 180,000, not 1.8 million. So listen, that's an example of one is uncovering friction and people that aren't happy. It's about the idea of stepping up and paying attention. Yellow Cab could have created that same system. They could have created an app, but they didn't. Another good example of reducing friction or creating a better employee experience is the idea of UPS. I just love this story. Is they analyzed their drivers and efficiencies and safety, and what they realized is if they only allowed their drivers to make right-hand turns, even though the driving mileage would be longer, the actual gas efficiency and the safety of the car, the vehicle and the driver would be better because left-hand turns are where the most frequent accidents happened, and it's also the stop and go is more often rather than a right on red and all the rest that you can do with a right-hand turn. And so you'll notice if you travel with behind a UPS driver, 95% of the turns they make are right-hand turns, even if it's a longer route. They only make right-hand turns. Just a unique thing that they studied to figure out. So I think that's interesting. And the final example I'll give you is something like Zappos. Now, granted, they're part of Amazon now, I'm pretty sure. But when they first came out, I mean, you could call them up and you could order a pizza or you could order sneakers. The point is they wanted to be your first call. So they created an experience that was very unique. So I think these are just a couple of examples. And in the book, I talk about, probably a dozen or 15 or 20 different stories throughout each chapter altogether that help you get real life examples of where these principles kind of line up and how you help somebody create a better client experience, customer experience.
I loved all the stories that you shared, especially with Kodak, the other ones that you talked about here also. And I think what is more important is focusing on the customer.
Yeah. Kodak is that's in the first chapter, Kodak. And the reason why that's in the first chapter is they invented the digital camera, but they put it in a safe because they felt it was going to cannibalize their film business. And now look at where Kodak is today, right? It's just a name that we use because we were so used to it, but they're out of business, really. It's not even there anymore, and everybody else has the digital camera. So that was a stepping up and paying attention moment that really is pretty sad because they could have dominated that digital business if they weren't afraid of cannibalizing their film business.
That is so true. And timing is very important in a lot of times. So What are the most
Yeah.
common mistakes, companies make when trying to attract and retain customers?
Yeah, boy. The list is probably longer, but if I had to pick a key one, look, I think this goes back to that empowering the employees. You listen, everything starts with an interaction. Okay, so whether that's with a person on a phone, a person in a store, a person at an airport, even if it's a digital system or AI in today's world, that interaction component is crucial. So I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is they hire people for jobs, not careers. And I think businesses need to focus on not just filling an empty seat, but filling it with the right people. And I've always, and throughout my career, especially over the last 27 years in particular, I've really focused on bringing on talent. I can mold you into understanding research or service providers or software technology. But what I can't necessarily teach you is the EQ components of your personality and that experiential, your passion that you're going to have. So this idea of focusing in on how and who you employ in your business is probably a mistake I see far too often.
I mean, you're so right. It doesn't matter if it's a digital age, nothing has really changed when it comes to the art of customer seduction. I think the fundamentals always remain the same.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, a lot of times today we talk about cost optimization. If your customer experience ideas involve cost cutting, most likely it's not a customer experience idea. Just call it what it is. You should constantly be doubling down on how you're investing in client and customer experience, and it will more than pay for itself. So I understand you've obviously got to do cost cutting and cost optimization, and frankly, we help clients do it all the time. But the key area is look and understand what your client experience component is and make sure you're keeping that intact and you're not just delusional around the short-term savings, because the long-term loss is going to be big.
Just while you were talking, it reminded me how you emphasize, on the authenticity, right? How do businesses strike a balance between being strategic, trying to persuade, and also genuine, building a genuine connection? Can we talk a little bit about how do you handle rejection or customer disinterest when in this framework?
Yeah, look at the framework is not designed to be rigid, and it's not around a customer having disinterest in the framework. Look at what customer is going to complain to you that you're trying too hard to reduce friction of my experience with your brand, right? So the principles of the framework are really designed to help a business improve it. What I would say is, you've got to understand all these principles internally, and your customers will appreciate the outcome. They're gonna notice that the interaction with your employees is different. They're gonna see that you're constantly removing hurdles from how they interact with your brand. So I don't think there's a disinterest. But now, listen, they may reject your offering, and that's a different situation. And sometimes, look, if you don't have a value proposition that is aligned with what that customer needs at that time, then that's okay, and you move on to the next opportunity. But the key is, are you listening enough? Just like with me on that date, are you listening enough to understand what's happening and what that person has interest in, and then how do you align the things that you honestly do have that you can offer that person that would be a match? So that would be how I would look at the kind of the rejection piece. I don't think it's about the framework rejection. I think it's just in general, if you don't have a value proposition that's going to meet a customer's needs, they may move on to something else, and that's okay.
Where does storytelling come into play in this whole process?
Storytelling is the key. I mean, it's a huge component. The idea is when you think about the stories. I'll give you an example. I mean, I'm not a huge beer drinker, but when Budweiser came out with their 9/11 commercial at the Super Bowl, and there was no words, and it was just the horses, the very famous, Clydesdales, and they were delivering the Budweiser beer, and they came up to the ocean, to the river, and you could look across to New York City, and I'm getting goosebumps now talking about it. The horses all bowed to New York City, and that's storytelling. So, this idea, marketing and storytelling. It's a huge component to driving and seducing your customers and building trust and loyalty to your brand. That's 24 years ago, and I think about that commercial every day almost.
It absolutely leaves a mark, in everybody's mind. Uh, how do these principles, how do they differ across industries? You work B2B versus B2C. Do you see any big difference in business models?
Yeah. Well, look at what's ironic is, I mean, I've worked with clients that are retail. So you're talking about, a basket for a customer is $45, right? All the way up to deals that are worth over $1 billion. Okay. And when you look at the framework and the principles, there's nothing changes for those. Okay. The idea of friction. So for example, on $1 billion deals, one of the big friction points that a lot of service providers miss is they get to the final stage. They've been selected. They told the best stories. They've inspired the client to say yes. And then they hand them back a 500-page legal document with 3/4 of it in red ink, okay, with changes. And I've literally seen clients lose $300-400 million deals because they realized, wow, if it's this hard to work with them on a legal perspective, imagine what it would be if they actually did our business. So whether you're running a retail or running a $400-500 million, $1 billion deal, the framework around friction, customer employee experience, and empowering your employees, understanding your competition, et cetera, all those principles still line up. B2C is business to customer, and you obviously understand who the customer is you're satisfying. B2B, if you're providing services to B2B, then you want to understand your client's clients. Okay, so if you're a service provider and you're doing business with L'Oreal, then you want to understand what L'Oreal is trying to deliver to their customers, and that's what you want to strive for is how do I help my client, L'Oreal, create better experiences for their client, which is the customers buying their products. Does that make sense?
No, it does. Have you been in a situation where you felt the customer just can't be seduced, or when you feel that the business has to walk away?
Yeah, I mean, look, sales is frankly a job of rejection, not a job of yeses, right? It's a hard position. So, that's why you sharpen your skills and you become a great storyteller and you become a great listener. But I've run into lots of situations of no, and it's because my value proposition didn't perfectly align with the needs of that client at that time. I've pursued clients for years. I remember going back, several years, but Nestle Frozen called us up and wanted to do some work around trade spend. It wasn't an area of our expertise. And I had been pursuing Nestle Frozen for a very long time and could not get them on board. So we said, listen, we can't help you with that trade spend work, but give me 24 hours and we'll get you a company that can help you with that. And we did it. And the guy was really surprised. And guess what? 2 months later, he called back and asked if we could help with another area. And we couldn't. But I said, give us 24 hours. And we gave him another supplier. Guess what? 3 months later, he called us up again. And next time we were able to actually help him. So the key is sales and selling and seducing. It's a lot about no's, and then it's understanding what that client really needs and how you at some point might get to a yes. And frankly, some are just going to be a no forever, and that's okay. You just move on to the next opportunity.
If there is one piece of advice from your book that listeners could implement immediately, what would that be?
Well, outside of reading my book, I would say probably one of the most impactful things a business can do right away, because some of the things take a little longer, like reshaping your team and everything else. I would say create a friction audit. So if you're in the retail business or B2C and you're directly dealing with customer experiences, you should have your executive team go through those experiences. I remember Walgreens, they have their key executives during the holidays work the store for one day so they can see what friction there is in the store and go back to headquarters and make improvements. Same thing with UPS. Their executives drive the truck a week every year so they can understand the process. So I would say I would have the executive team and your key leaders go and experience what your customers are experiencing in a B2C situation. And same thing if it's online or in store, et cetera, and be that friction hunter and create a friction audit where you can make big changes quick. You'll be surprised. You will be surprised how much you find that can quickly be resolved that creates such a better experience just by doing a friction audit. And then the other piece I would put into place, this takes a little longer, but I just think it's so important, is this idea of bringing on people that are really looking for careers and not jobs. And so I would look at, how are you onboarding? How are you interviewing? Are you asking the questions that truly matter in that interview process? What are the EQ questions you're incorporating into your interview process? Trust me, it makes a difference. So those would probably be the two things I would say to jump on right away. The first one, you could start tomorrow. And the employee one, you could do in 6 months. You could really have a much better understanding of how you're onboarding and bringing on and retaining your employees.
If you could add one chapter to your book today, what would that be about?
Okay. Well, let me tell you, it took me 18 months to write this book, so it's not an easy thing. So one more chapter would be probably 3 months, right? So or 2 months. I would say I finished this book right as AI was starting to come out. And so there's not anything in there really related to AI because it was kind of just a term at that point. I mentioned a couple things on the end, like, what AI might do, but it was high level. So if I was going to go back and add one chapter right now, I probably would add a chapter around agentic AI, the human in the loop, the interaction, the client experience. And by the way, it's not just client experience in call center. It's AI and agentic AI and supply chains and pricing and weather predictions, creating all better customer and client experiences. So I would probably create a whole chapter and do interviews with executives around how agentic AI is making a difference in client experience.
That is very interesting to hear. And I'm very curious to know what's next for you. Any new projects or areas you're exploring?
Okay. Well, listen, it took me 18 months to get the book done, which was about 14 months longer than I thought it would take. I was very optimistic. And I've got a phenomenal job and responsibility. I became the president of research. I've been with ISG now for 7 years and became their president of research 2 years ago. So I'm pretty busy. I'd say the thing that I'm most excited about now that I do and I have time for is I am out and I do this globally. I do it in India. I do it in the UK. I do it in the US. I've done it all over the world. Is I'll go in and do keynotes for customer sessions, for employee sessions, for sales kickoffs. And I do this whole theme around the idea of creating this exceptional customer client experience. And I enjoy that. So if I said over the next 2 or 3 years, what I would be doing outside of my day job is I would have some fun with doing some of these keynotes through ISG. And I've really had a lot of fun doing that.
John, thank you for sharing your insights on what truly seduces customers in today's market. Your perspective from leading ISG research, seeing what works across hundreds of engagements has been invaluable. To our listeners, remember, seducing your customer isn't manipulation. It's understanding, anticipation, and delivering real value. Thank you for joining us, John.
Saradha, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Love the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you.